today, as part of OUCIP Lecture series, Madam has accepted to deliver a talk on postmodernism to metamodernism. Postmodernism started its journey sometime and somewhere in late 19th century as a cultural movement, and Madam is going to talk to evaluate the journey of metamodernism and how it has evolved as a cultural movement over the last 2 decades of the 21st century. Madam is the right person to talk on the topic, and we have a close association with Professor Shruti Das Madam. She is a life member of our OUCIP. She has visited our center many times and she was keynote speaker. She had delivered number of lectures at our center, and she is always supporting to OUCIP. And on behalf of the center, my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Shruti Das, Professor of English, Berhampur University. Now, I invite Professor Shruti Das Madam to deliver her talk on postmodernism to metamodernism.
Thank you very much, Dr. Konda Nageswara Rao. Thank you, OUCIP. That was a very, very kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I want to carry on the legacy of being a part of OUCIP, the erstwhile ASRC, and Osmania University. I'm engaged in many activities with Osmania University. I'm so happy today to have been generously invited by the director OUCIP and my dear friend, the S-Director, but the present Dean of Arts, Professor A. Karunakar. A very good afternoon to all the participants. A very good afternoon to OUCIP.
Good afternoon, Professor Shruti Das. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Sir. Thank you for this warm welcome. I'm ever obliged to OUCIP because I have started my journey as an academic from OUCIP, the erstwhile ASRC, in its corridors, in its, amongst its bookshelves, in the coffee room, in the balconies. I'm getting goosebumps all over when I think of the beautiful times I have spent there as a young girl and as a senior academic today. It's all full of memories. Thank you, everyone. All right. Okay, thank you. I shall start with the slogan of the COVID-19 pandemic. Negative is the new positive. A complete disbelief in God and absolute trust on science and rationalism, giving way to a rebirth of faith as the invisible virus beats all reason, all power, and all borders, forcing the human to rethink, reassess, and relocate into a confined space defined by our four walls. When only survival and not existence, mind you, nobody's bothering about existence, it's only survival, and that has become utmost important. The borderlessness of the virtual workplace and the virtual relationship have made us reevaluate fragmentation and re-seek the unseen God. The anxiety of voluntary imprisonment takes us to re-gauge the depth of the philosophies of yesteryears and the truth quotient in them. Searle, writing about Postmodernism in 2009, noted that, I quote, "Postmodernism is dead, but something altogether weirder has taken its place." This takes us to a discussion on the postmodernist ideology before we stamp its demise. Postmodernism started its journey sometime and somewhere in the late 19th century as a cultural movement, skeptically engaging itself with ontology, breaking down structures, and questioning grand narratives. It was the intellectual reaction to modernist essentialism and the classical Western ontology pioneered by Plato. It presupposes that everything has an eternal referent and a prescribed structure. For example, Aristotle's theory of tragedy and thingness of a thing, which Derrida calls the metaphysics of presence. So all those things were denuded, like the thingness was denuded or questioned by the postmodernist, and Derrida wrote it off as the metaphysics of presence. In my talk, I shall critically evaluate postmodernism, its waning, and the evolution of metamodernism as a cultural movement over the last 2 decades of the 21st century. Now let's look over our shoulder to essentialism. So, essentialism is a precursor to postmodernism. Essence is definitely an ideology and has political benefit. It assumes that things have a trans-historical, universal, eternal essence which doesn't change, even if space-time conditions change. Essentialism is accompanied by some form of coercion which imposes conditions arising in a particular situation under general circumstances, and thus dictates terms of essence of eternal goodness of literary production. We have seen the banning of literature, art, as it fails to fall in line with the essential quality of literature, that is the goodness of literature. And so we have seen the banning in the 20th century, early 20th century, or the second decade of 20th century, of D.H. Lawrence's books like The Rainbow, Women in Love, Lady Chatterley's Lover, and of course Nabokov's Lolita, and many such texts, which were non-conformist and shocked the sentiments of the essentialists. Essentialism serves to hegemonize knowledge and impose it on all social groups such that only one variety of knowledge exists. The standardization of literature negates the differences that exist in literary production in different time and space and in different environments. Western anti-essentialism is linked to anti-metaphysics and anti-traditional essence. With the change and development of society, the concept of the essence of literature and the morality it was supposed to reflect has undergone a sea change. We have seen the rise of women writers who do not simply write about romance under patriarchy's wing, but explore many contexts and contents. We have our own Arundhati Roy. We have Toni Morrison. We have many such women who have broken down the barriers imposed by essentialism on them. Gradually, the essentialist model, which is a rigid production model, which defined the whatness of entity, closed, arbitrary, and old, was outdated. Now, postmodernism, which has often been misunderstood and viewed with suspicion by essentialists, can be described as a set of critical, strategic, and rhetorical practices employing concepts such as differences, repetition, the trace, the simulacrum, and hyperreality to destabilize other concepts such as presence, identity, historical progress, epistemic certainty, and the university of meaning. The term postmodernism first entered into the philosophical lexicon in 1979 with the publication of The Postmodern Condition by Jean-François Lyotard. The later 19th century is the age of achieved reality, where science and technology, including networks of mass communication and transportation, reshape human perception. There is no clear distinction then between the natural and the artificial in experience. Indeed, many proponents of postmodernism challenge the viability of such a distinction, seeing in achieved modernism the emergence of a problem the essentialist philosophical tradition has repressed. A consequence of achieved modernism is what postmodernism or postmodernists might refer to as derealization. Derealization affects both the subject and the objects of experience, such that their sense of identity, constancy, and substance is upset or dissolved. Important precursors to this notion are found in Kierkegaard, Marx, and Nietzsche. Kierkegaard, for example, describes modern society as a network of relations in which individuals are leveled into an abstract concept known as the public. The modern public, in contrast to ancient and medieval communities, is a creation of the press. So the press has created something, a body of communicators called the public. And the public is mostly somebody who is passive, silent, right? Which is the only instrument capable of holding together the mass of unreal individuals who never are and never can be united as an actual situation or organization. This is about essentialism. So when I was talking about how essentialism is talking about the goodness of literary production and how it serves to hegemonize knowledge and impose it on all social groups, so that knowledge is controlled by the essentialist and nobody can go beyond that knowledge. If they go beyond that knowledge, then they are to be chastised. They are to be that literature is to be banned and they are going to be thrown to the fringes of society, right? So next is postmodernism. I was talking about the critical, what is postmodernism, how it is a set of critical, strategic, and rhetorical practices which served to destabilize other concepts such as presence and identity and historical progress, epistemic certainty and university of meaning. We have plural meaning and polyvocality in postmodern places. And then I came to Kierkegaard. I was talking about Kierkegaard, and now we're going to talk about Nietzsche. So what does Kierkegaard tell us? Kierkegaard is talking about a public, right? This public which is created by the media, and this public who is actually controlled by the media, right? And this public who are unreal individuals who never are and never can be united in an actual situation or organization, right? So in this sense, society becomes a realization of abstract thought held together by an artificial and all-pervasive medium speaking for everyone and for no one. The notion of a collapse between the real and the apparent has been suggested by Nietzsche in his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, which he wrote way back in 1872, where he presents Greek tragedy as a synthesis of natural art impulses represented by the gods Apollo and Dionysius, where Apollo is the god of beautiful forms and images. Dionysius is the god of frenzy and intoxication, under whose sway the spell of individuated existence is broken in the moment of undifferentiated oneness with nature. So while tragic art is life-affirming in joining these two impulses, logic and science are built upon Apollonian representations and have become frozen and lifeless. This is what Nietzsche tells us, and the postmodernists take the cue from this. Hence, Nietzsche believes only a return of the Dionysian art impulse can save modern concepts of art and representation, excuse me, and also anticipates postmodernist fascination with the prospect of a revolutionary movement, auguring a new anarchic sense of community. In Being and Time, Heidegger conceives the human being as Dasein. There is a term that Heidegger uses called Dasein, which is not simply a present consciousness, but an event of ecstatic temporality that is open to a past that was never present. So this temporality or time is open to a past and that was never present, and it's already been there, and a future that is always yet to come. Okay, so the playfulness of meaning is introduced here. So this future would be the possibility of death, and now we see the death of postmodernism, right? So the finitude of Dasein, therefore, cannot be contained within the limits of consciousness, nor within the limits of the subject, whether it is conceived substantially or formally. In addition to the critiques of the subject offered by Nietzsche and Heidegger, many postmodernists also borrow heavily from psychoanalysis or psychoanalytical theories of Jacques Lacan. Lacan's distinctive gesture in his insistence that Freudian unconscious is a function. He says that the Freudian unconscious, the unconscious that Freud talks about, is a function or a set of functions belonging to language, is a set of functions belonging to language, and particularly to the verbal exchanges between analysts and analyzed during the analytical session. For Lacan, the subject is always the subject of speech, and that means speech directed towards another in relation to whom the subject differentiates and identifies itself. The subject, to get identity, has to differentiate and then identify, right? So this is the other. So on this view, language is a feature of the symbolic order of society, which is constituted as an economy of signifiers, through which animal need becomes human desire, whose first object is to be recognized by the other. So always the self needs to be recognized, needs to be ratified by the other. However, desire ultimately aims for something impossible: to possess, to be, or to occupy the space of the signifier of signifiers. That is the phallus. Insofar as the phallus, which in other parlance is understood as patriarchal power, okay, the phallic power or the patriarchal power, is nothing but the signifying function as such, okay, and it does not exist. This is what the postmodernists think, Lacan thinks. It is not an object to be possessed, but is that through which the subject and the other are brought into relation to begin with, and is thus imposed itself upon the subject as a fundamental absence or lack that is at once necessary and irredeemable. Hence, the subject is forever divided from itself and unable to achieve final unity or identity. As the subject of desire, it remains perpetually incomplete. Letard points out that while science has sought to distinguish itself from narrative knowledge in the form of tribal wisdom communicated through myths and legends, modern philosophy has sought to provide legitimating narratives for science in the form of, I quote, the dialectics of spirit, the hermeneutics of meaning, the emancipation of the rational or working subject, or the creation of will. Science, however, plays the language game of denotation to the exclusion of all others, and in this respect, it displaces narrative knowledge, including the meta-narratives of philosophy. This is due in part to what Letard characterizes as the rapid growth of technologies and techniques in the second half of the 20th century. where the emphasis of knowledge has shifted from the ends of human action to its means. So Leonard says that I define postmodern as incredulity towards meta-narratives. As a result, new hybrid disciplines develop without connection to old epistemic traditions, especially philosophy, and this means science only plays its own game and cannot legitimate others, such as moral prescription. So postmodern sensibility does not lament the loss of narrative coherence. It doesn't lament the loss of narrative coherence any more than the loss of being. However, the dissolution of narrative leaves the field of legitimization to a new unifying criterion, the performativity of knowledge-producing system, whose form of capital is information. So performative legitimization leaves or means maximizing the flow of information and minimizing static, non-functional moves in the system. So the performativity criterion threatens anything not meeting its requirements, such as speculative narratives with delegitimization and exclusion. Nevertheless, capital also demands the continual reinvention of the new in the form of new language or new language games and new denotative statements. In this regard, the modern paradigm of progress as new moves under established rules gives way to the postmodern paradigm of inventing new rules and changing the static. So deconstructivists claim that all knowledge is perspectival, that there is not one authentic reality, but diverse and culturally determined ways of seeing, and that meaning is always unstable. That is, it is always on the move, and there obtains ineluctably a slippage between the signifier, signified, and the referent. All right? Postmodern philosophers ask certain questions of reason, truth, human nature, history, and tradition. For instance, they ask, whose truth? Whose nature? Whose version of history? Whose tradition? So whose truth? Is there a truth? Is it your truth? Is it my truth? Is it the criminal's truth or the victim's truth? Whose truth? Whose nature? Whose version of history? Is it history or her story? Is it the history or the story of the people on the margins, or is it the story of the people at the center? Even the margin, which can be again considered to be a center, has various margins. The little narratives that Leonard was talking about, the little centers, the little places all over the world. So this makes the whole thing, the whole universe so plural that it defeats all kinds of purpose. So postmodernism protests and operates within an indefinable system. How can you define a system when it is so plural? So, or one it cannot define. So postmodernism either operates within an indefinable system or it cannot define a system. Why? Because of its own terms of non-reference. There is no referentiality. It keeps on moving. It keeps on moving. And there are multiple intertexts. It goes on back and forth without any kind of fixture. In this case, Terry Eagleton points out, the noted critic and Marxist, neo-Marxist Terry Eagleton points out, I quote, there is nothing there to be reflected, no reality. This is what he is talking as a critique of postmodernism, he says there is nothing there to be reflected, no reality that is not itself already image, spectacle, simulacrum, gratuitous fiction. If the unreality of the artistic image mirrors the unreality of its society as a whole, then we are left with no definable image, but merely, I quote, a form of commodity, fetishism, that is the order of the day. Now, this is as late as 1988. So, parody may have been one of the strengths of the avant-garde and modernism, but postmodernism, he says, mines the formal resolution of art and social life attempted by the avant-garde while remorselessly emptying it of political content. If something doesn't have any kind of content that is reasonably valid or meaningful to a public, there is no meaning in having such content. So the entire movement of postmodernism, as Eagleton and other critics have said, is basically intellectual. This is crucial to the position of the estranged ex-centers or eccentrics, because having now disposed of rational belief and parody, what is left? Not alienation. Eagleton continues, the depthless, dehistoricized, decatholicated surfaces of postmodernist culture are not meant to signify an alienation, for the very concept of alienation must secretly posit a dream of authenticity, which postmodernism finds quite unintelligible. So if you are making some alienation, somebody is being alienated. Okay, now, for example, I will take a simple, I'm again, well, this is some kind of a metamodernistic analysis. Suppose we take the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, the two epic texts here, or for that matter, if you take Homer's Odyssey. So what do we see here? That those people who have been alienated may be the people who have been exiled to the forest, maybe Ram and his brother and wife, and here, the 5 Pandavas with their mother, or there, when the war is going on, the Trojan War is going on, you find Helen or whatever, like Penelope and all those characters who have been estranged. What do they want? They have been alienated. They have been alienated from the people. So meaning in life has stopped, right? When the meaning in life has stopped, what are they looking for? They are looking for some dream of authenticity. They're looking for coming back. And postmodernism doesn't describe that. They find it unintelligible. They don't understand the meaning of coming back and having stability again. For postmodernism, it is always destabilization, and it realizes itself in something that is destabilized. So there is always an unstable condition, meaning and all those things, they're always unstable. So postmodern philosophy emphasizes the elusiveness of meaning. Meaning is never there, and elusiveness of knowledge. No knowledge is sacrosanct. There is no stability of knowledge. No meaning is denotative, okay? And there is no sanctity of meaning, because the next day there would be a deferment and the meaning would be different and deferred from the previous meaning. This is often expressed in postmodern art as a concern with representation and an ironic self-awareness. And the argument that postmodernism is over or dead, which was made by Alan Kirby and Linda Hutcheon, has already been made philosophically. There are people who have essentially asserted that for a while we believed in postmodern ideas, but not anymore. And from now on, we are going to believe in critical realism. For instance, okay, I lost that slide. Okay, fine. For instance, Susan Bordeaux inquires how the human knower is to negotiate this infinitely perspectival, destabilized world. How is someone going to negotiate this, where deconstruction may slip into its own fantasy of escape from human locatedness? So if you cannot locate, how do you understand yourself? How do you negotiate your existence? There is a failure on the part of postmodernist theory to explain how challenges can be made and met. Somewhere in the late or early 2000, the emergence of new technologies restructured violently and forever the nature of the author, the reader, and the text, and the relationships between them. Our historicity, our temporality, non-referentiality, and ever-elusiveness of postmodern waned out by the late 1900s and first decade of the 21st century, when the assumed borderless, the assumed borderless globe and the anxious geopolitics moved right, defining cultures and drawing borders, recognizing typical intellectual states, which are ignorance, fanaticism, and anxiety. Now, Bush, Blair, Bin Laden, ISIS, Xi Jinping, Bolsonaro, Trump, Modi, and their likes on one side, and the more numerous but less powerful masses on the other. So postmodernism belongs to a world pervaded by the encounter between religiously fanatical segments and dictated and shaped by media. In this context, postmodernism uses fantastically sophisticated technology to the pursuit of medieval barbarism, like uploading of videos of beheadings onto the internet. You know, it's so grotesque, so grotesque. It hurts the sensibility, like, you know, the ISIS taking a lot of people, lining them up on the beach and then beheading them. Okay, or the use of mobile phones to film torture in prison, rape scenes, lynching, etc. The reality is that beyond this, the destiny of everyone else is to suffer the anxiety of getting hit in the crossfires of extremes. This fatalistic anxiety extends far beyond geopolitics into every aspect of contemporary life, from a general fear of social breakdown and identity loss to a deep unease about diet and health, from anguish about destructiveness of climate change to the effects of a new personal ineptitude and helplessness in the face of getting and retaining jobs, which yield TV programs about how to clean your house, because you see, media cannot help us with these anxieties, coping with these anxieties. They divert our attention, and we have TV programs about how to clean our house, bring up our children, or remaining solvent, and many such kinds of things. This technologized cluelessness, because the society has become clueless as to how to handle the problems of helplessness in the face of retaining jobs, new personal ineptitude, and, you know, climate change, environment depletion, kind of religious fanaticism, and whatever else we are exposed to in this world. This technologized cluelessness is utterly contemporary. The pseudo-modernist communicates constantly with the other side of the planet, yet needs to be told to eat vegetables to be healthy, a fact self-evident in the Bronze Age. So, you know, what we are doing, we are going back to the Bronze Age, like a Bronze Age situation where we are telling people what they should eat, what they should not eat, right? And so that they remain healthy. For example, yesterday was International Yoga Day, so we are telling people do yoga, and there was a statistics that, you know, 88% of the people in Odisha do not do yoga, as if that means something. Well, but It was there, and that was breaking news. Well, the state of cluelessness is a characteristic fusion of the childish and the advanced, the powerful and the helpless. For varying reasons, these are people incapable of disbelief of grand narratives, which later argued typified postmodernists. Postmodernists did not believe in grand narratives, and these people could not disbelieve grand narratives. The contemporary generation it is impossible for the contemporary generation to ahistoricize themselves or not to believe in the grand narratives, because we look back at 1920 and 100 years back and 100 years back to see how pandemics worked and how long they stayed in the world and how long they affected lives of people. The forces that once drove postmodernism seem now to be depleted, however. Postmodernism rejected grand narratives, including those of religion, the concept of progress, and of history itself. Angela Carter's fiction, and particularly The Bloody Chamber, provides a clear example of the typical postmodernist impulse. That is, in rewriting traditional fairy tales, she subverts grand narratives of gender, sexuality, and female subjectivity. In contrast, in today's cultural climate, there appears to be a renewed engagement with history and a revival of mythic meaning making that the arch postmodernists would have abhorred. They wouldn't have liked it at all. Ruth Oziki's A Tale for the Time Being, for example, relates interconnecting histories, among them the story of a Japanese kamikaze pilot in the Second World War and the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, contextualizing both in a history of ideas by reflecting throughout on the principles of Zen Buddhism. We see a lot of remakes, we see a lot of reinscription of stories, how they connect to the older mythologies or older stories to the contemporary times. From the late 1980s onwards, novelists, artists, critics, and art historians have foreseen the death of postmodernism. Linda Hutcheon, in the second edition of The Politics of Postmodernism in 2002, declared it is over. It is over. Dead. The contemporary period, but no movement can ever be over. So it is still there, but it has been overpowered by other movements, right? And this was brought about, I'm sure, by cultural materialism and neo-historicism. So the contemporary period, starting with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and gathering momentum throughout the 1990s and beyond, is often said to have a distinct intensity and thus feels like a moment in which the words of the narrator in Ben Lerner's novel 10.04, we find the world is rearranging itself. What could be more of a slap to postmodernism than the breaking down of the Berlin Wall and rearranging or renegotiation of the communist with the capitalist? While intellectuals were debating over demolishing grand narratives of society, culture, and literature, conceiving little narratives and multivocality, structurelessness, and the fusion of borders, the masses were grappling with real life conditions and they were looking otherwise. A globalized world created by the media gave access to a plethora of information on political upheavals, changing faces of democracy, revival of autocracies, unstable governments, economic uncertainties, environment degradation, and its effect on human life, climate change, rising of seas, terrible storms and diseases, terrorism, mass migration, border sealing, rise of fanaticism and religious fundamentalism, and its putative impact on human life. So, information which made anxiety universal. When the media is full of this information, whenever you switch on the TV or open a newspaper or the WhatsApp or anything that you look to, Twitter, or anything that you look to, you find all these things are the subject matter of discussion. You see a movie, these are the subject matters of discussion. And then, what do? They make anxiety universal. The situation turned from belief in nihilism and individualism towards a desperate seeking of emotion, connections, and faith. So postmodern skepticism that meaning is illusory gave way to a new seeking of meaning in life and stories. This movement, which subtly started in the last decade of the 20th century, sought unity of the self or equilibrium between reason and sensibility, indicating that stories do have meaning and living, telling, or remembering them can aid one's self-realization. This movement of the early 20th century was termed Metamodernism. It posited renewed interest for a tellable story, as well as efforts to incorporate or sublimate previous paradigms of thought, as opposed to the postmodern propensity towards fragmentation and the iconoclastic or ironic distancing from traditions. Social theorists Francis Fukuyama published an article in the National Interest. So the name of the journal was National Interest in 1989, titled The End of History. Here he argued that with the pending demise of the communist empire, so you see Russia was to disintegrate and the communist empires were to disintegrate. So he says that with the pending demise of the communist empire, history with a capital H, that is not simply the chronology of time passing, but the chronicle of man's evolutionary process, has ended. He suggested in a subsequent book, The End of History and the Last Man in 1992, that it meant rather that there would be no further progress in the development of underlying principles and institutions because all of the really big questions had been settled in a, how had they been settled? They had been settled in a liberal democratic setup. So the world was moving towards liberal democracy and all the questions had been answered and there was a flux in society. And now 20 years later, in 2012, this social theorist makes a U-turn. He writes, so Fukuyama wrote, so I read a quote from a book and I write, Fukuyama wrote another article broaching the subject of history, published this time in a journal called Foreign Affairs. It was entitled The Future of History. Here Fukuyama wrote that calling the end of history may in retrospect have been just a bit premature. For the alleged unabashed victory of liberal democracy, he conceded, had since come under some scrutiny. Democratic governments all over the world increasingly fail to deliver on its promises. Most national economies have not proliferated, but have stagnated or gone into long-term recessions. Political extremism, left and right, liberal and conservative, secular and religious, is on the rise. The middle classes, the traditional stronghold of 20th century liberal democracy, are shrinking. Isn't it so? We all are seeing that, even in India today. And social media have problematized 20th century notions of freedom of speech and the free press. In addition, a serious contender for geopolitical hegemony has emerged, that is, China's straight regulated market system. There are, in other words, plenty of big questions left to be answered. So authors like Kagan in 2008, Milne in 2012, Badeo in 2012, and others like them have reposed their arguments in Rebirth, Return, and The Revenge of History. All of them agree that, I quote, history has been rebooted by recent world historical crisis as an ecological, economic, or geopolitical nature, unquote. Our changed social status and the reappearance of history have proven increasingly that postmodern vernacular is inadequate and inapt to address the language of present social changes. So, Robin van den Acker, in his book called Metamodernism, tells us that since the turn of the millennium, we have seen the emergence of various new, often overlapping aesthetic phenomena, such as the new romanticism in the arts, the new mannerism in crafts, the new aesthetic in design, the new sincerity in literature, the new weird or new folk in music, quirky cinema and quality television, as well as the discovery of a new terrain of architecture, each of them characterized by an attempt to incorporate postmodern stylistic and formal conventions while moving beyond them. Everything has started moving beyond them. Okay, so Robin van den Acker, Alison Gibbons, and Timotheus Vermeulen have defined metamodernism as a structure of feeling that emerged in the 2000s. It was a structure of feeling and has become the dominant cultural logic of Western capitalist societies today. Metamodernism is not a new term. It had been first used by Zavarzadeh in the 1970s to describe a tendency in literature to move beyond the interpretive modernistic novel. This tendency, Zavarzadeh argued, is exemplified by tropes, which is Black humor, parody, metafiction, the abandonment of depth models, and authors like Robbe-Grillet, Barthes, Barthelin, Woolf, etc., or et al., and others, that make apparent that this use of the term metamodern indicates what is today generally considered a variant of postmodernism. The most important thing about metamodernism is its conception as a structure of feeling. It was Raymond Williams who first called metamodernism a structure of feeling. He says it is a sensibility, a sentiment that is so pervasive as to call it structural. It has become structural, integrated into the structure of society. Van den Acker et al. Give an interesting analogy to bring home the nature of metamodernism. This is very interesting. They compare metamodernism to whiskey. So they say, as drinkers of Scotch whiskey will know, single malt island and coastal whiskies tend to be characterized by a saline savour. None of these whiskies count salt among their ingredients. However, like all single malts, the spirits only contain malted grain, often barley, occasionally rye, yeast, and water. The distinct saltiness presumably is blown into the brew via the sea winds. So when it is being made in the brewery, the sea winds add the salinity to it. No one can see it. It is not distinctly visible, but it is there. It is not tangible as an ingredient, but very much there in the taste. So the structure of feeling is much the same. It is that element of culture that circumscribes it, but nonetheless cannot be traced back to any one of its individual ingredients. So, metamodernism as a structure of feeling. So, we have a kind of feeling, we feel something which we cannot pinpoint, which we cannot say that it is tangibly there. It doesn't cater to the physical senses, but it is there. We know, we have a feeling, we say we have a sixth sense of feeling that that ingredient is there. It can be ascribed instead to the particular experience of time and place. So spatiality and temporality are the flavors, right? So it can be ascribed to the particular experience. So experience is that ingredient which tempers the structure of feeling. So Raymond William explains that artistic conventions are malleable depending on the context. As the structure changes, new meanings are perceived and realized, while old meanings come to appear empty and artificial. A structure of feeling is, in this sense, a particular quality of social experience, historically distinct from other particular qualities, which gives the sense of a generation or of a period. It is present in the movements and styles and other phenomena which being reducible to any of them, without being reducible to any of them in particular. The prefix meta, okay, I'll come to Mary Holland in a while. So, yeah, stay here is. So, the prefix meta establishes a particular understanding of the current sensibility. So, meta in Greek means three things: with or among. So, you're with something or among something. Between and after. You're between an event or you're after a particular event. Okay. So, these are the three things: with or among, between, and then after. The metamodern structure of feeling is situated with or among older and newer structures of feeling. As indicated, this first and foremost entails that metamodernism is today's dominant structure of feeling among a host of subordinate structures of feeling that Williams dubbed as residuals or emergent. Either these feelings are residuals from the past, from postmodernist feelings, or they are newer emergent feelings that will reimagine another kind of a future. Yet, it also entails that metamodern culture has a distinctively different relation to the past and the future than postmodern culture. Postmodern culture only asked us to break, right? To separate, to segregate, to break, to make individual. But metamodern culture is definitely different from this. Critics James and Seshagiri, in their article Metamodernism, Narrative of Continuity and Revolution, which they published in 2014, they have made a similar point. They contend, I quote, a growing number of contemporary novelists, among them Julian Barnes, Ian McEwan, Cynthia Ozick, Will Self, and Z.D. Smith, place a conception of modernism as revolution at the heart of their fictions, styling their 21st century literary innovations as explicit engagements with the innovations of the early 20th century writing. Likewise, Mary Holland reconnects 21st century American fiction to the modern in metamodernism. In her closing chapter of Succeeding Postmodernism, which she wrote in 2013, Holland sees in contemporary fiction a truthful tension, the encapsulation of the 21st century mood of possibility for connection within self-conscious acts of language. This, she argues, is also a kind of post-structural metafictional version of modernism. But it is a modernism that is crucially self-aware and literature that is aware of being literature, operating in a modernist vein through postmodernist literary techniques turned towards modernist goals. And this is metamodernism for them. These trends in contemporary literature point towards that what might be understood as upcycling of past styles, conventions, and techniques. Whereas the postmoderns recycled popular culture, canonized works, and Dept masters by means of parody or pastiche. Metamodern artists, from writers to artists in a broader sense, increasingly pick out from the scrap heap of history those elements that allow them to re-signify the present and reimagine a future. To conclude, I reiterate my argument that postmodernism gathered steam and ran full force in the 20th century, patronized by French thinkers and American academics. But towards the last decades of the 20th century, its charisma had worn off and it had weakened as a cultural movement. Politicians, economists, and scholars had renewed their engagement with history and a new meaning making in a revivalist new cultural movement called which is called Metamodernism. Thank you all for your patient hearing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your very wonderful and lucid presentation. You have started the discussion on postmodernism by explaining its journey and where it was started and its growth and development, and breaking down the structures and questioning the grand narratives and how it gathered the strength in the 20th century, and its contribution and how it was strengthened by French thinkers and its new cultural movement as metamodernism. And you have evaluated well, madam. Thank you very much. Now it is open for the discussion, doubts, and queries.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. I think it was really enlightening, though it was just for an hour of 60 minutes. I think, ma'am, I'm from media and communication. How do we see this metamodernism in media, per se, in films or in narratives that have been coming across? Thank you.
Right. Well, media couldn't do with postmodernism, right? And so metamodernism is something that has actually been promoted, or, it has, because, media has made the world a global space or a smaller space, whatever, right? And it has made the world borderless. So when people are seeing these kind of things that I was explaining, or I was hinting at, beheading of people, or, making these videos viral, like George Floyd's lynching on the streets of Minnesota, or the Rohingya refugees, how they are, what's happening to them and to the migrants during the first lockdown. See, there are all people dying in Italy and people dying in America, how the vaccine doesn't work, and how in spite of the vaccine, people are dying. These things have changed the absolutely, what do you call it? Like, it has changed the meaning of life. It has opened, media has promoted this. Media has opened up intellectuals, or opened up spaces wherein intellectuals cannot say that we will not connect to history. We will not connect to the contemporary. We will be individualized. We will be thinking about something that was there in the that is there, which is the meaning is deferred. So that didn't make any meaning anymore. So this became a metamodern a metamodern thing where people could connect to the past, they could think. And as I said, media has taken people from thinking about existentialism, elevation, and all kinds of things to survival instinct. Now it is big. Again, I gave a hint. I was speaking about the food habits and how, like we are telling people you should eat this, you should eat that, as if they don't know because they are high intellectuals, as if we are taking them back to the Bronze Age. But who is doing this? It is media who previously, media had created a public which was a public that was a passive, silent, receiving public. Now, the media has created a public that is a thinking public, may be biased at some point in time, but this public is now thinking that liberal is now thinking and knowing is in knowledge is there with the public that liberal democracy has gone away, that India is no longer a democratic country but a elected autocracy, right? That is what they call it, quote unquote. I didn't say it, right? So these kinds of things, when we see these are the things that are our reality, contemporary reality. So literature, thought, philosophy, economy, everything, we cannot see somebody takes your money and goes away like Choksi, like what's that fellow's name, Modi, whatever, Nirav Modi. Modi, right? And other people, they steal your money and go away. So you are scared. Can I keep my money there? Where do I keep my money? And once you keep it at home, there is demonetization. So the society is in a flux. You don't know what to do. And so the only thing now is survival. Now see, we are sitting in a virtual world. We haven't met each other, but now we know each other because of this virtual world. Again, that is so scary. Because this virtual world is not your little space. It is a space in cyberspace. It is open to criticism anywhere, everywhere. Anyone can hear me. Anyone has heard me. Right? And I am open to criticism. I am open to trolling. I'm open to anything everywhere. Right? Also, see, this is one point, one aspect of the thing, where the other aspect is we are closed within four walls. There is a lockdown. And that is a voluntary imprisonment because we don't want to go and catch the virus. And who has told us that? That's the media. Right? So the media is protecting us, is telling us things. So in the name of protection, the media is giving us intellectual inputs, is making us knowledgeable about certain things, and connecting us to a history, showing us constantly maybe contemporary history, maybe something that was there 100 years ago, maybe a myth that was written in the Malika, or maybe Nostradamus predictions. So all these things are disturbing society, and postmodernism does not have answers to this. It is inadequate. The language of postmodernism is inept and inadequate to address these vital issues which are important to human life. So now, you can talk about whether it is anthropocentrism or post-anthropocentrism. Should we protect nature, or should not nature protect us? Should we use nature for development, or should we protect nature for oxygen? We cut down the trees because we need homes, we need furniture, we need this and that. And then we don't have oxygen. We have to pay for oxygen. So look at the kind of tension we are in. So these tensions are addressed by metamodernism.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Most welcome.
Ma'am, we have received a question on the chat box. Shall I read it?
Please do.
Now we are living in a society where crossing borders is very easy. How can we interpret metamodernism in relation to diasporic studies?
Could you relate diasporic studies to postmodernism? Diasporic studies is something which talks about movement, which talks about migration. Okay, there are so many kinds of migration. Something migration when you are compelled to migrate, when you are forced to migrate, like the indentured laborers who were taken to Trinidad, Tobago, who were taken to the Andaman Islands, who were taken to various places by the British, and self-styled migration, migration for capital gain, like our children go abroad all the time for a better life. There's so many kinds of migration that create, when you go there, you settle there, you create a diaspora. So metamodernism is a cross between modernism and postmodernism. It is beyond postmodernism. It is open to borderlessness, and at the same time, it connects history. Like postmodernism would say that those people who are in a diaspora are not connected, the umbilical cord is cut. But metamodernism would see the character traits of that particular diaspora, suppose the Telugu diaspora, the Odia diaspora, or the Bengali diaspora, their eating habits, their way of style, and the way of thinking, the cognition. This connects to the roots. And this rootedness actually talks about, metamodernism talks about this rootedness connecting between histories. Like you read Zadie Smith, you read the recent book which got some awards, Hamlet. So, now they're talking about Shakespeare's son, Hamlet. There was no need to talk about that. Why did somebody want to dig out a history? So, in the metamodern lingo or the metamodern phase, you find a lot of historical novels coming up. So, when you're talking about diaspora studies, you need to pinpoint diaspora studies is a big area. Which part of diaspora studies? If you talk about the trauma, again, that is metamodern, because they are thinking, they are rootedness, they have linked themselves with the roots, and because they cannot adjust, they feel the pain, and that is the trauma. So there is an interconnectedness, something to feel, to connect, to reconnect, to come back. So that is structurally there. Metamodernism is all about those spaces where you have the structure of feeling.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I hope I've answered your question.
Giving the answers. Thank you so much, ma'am. Your deliberation was very lucid and very intellectual. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, we have next question by Ayesha. Is there any positive effect of metamodernism?
Definitely. That is why every movement has some kind of an effect, right? Positive. A movement that has come to be, let's say it started in the last decade of the 20th century, and it is here in the 21st century. If it has lasted 30 years, right? 30 years. So it must be having some positive effect, some positive impact on society. Otherwise, it wouldn't continue. And it is reimagining the future. So something that reimagines a future has to have some impact on society. So if you call what is positive, so I started my lecture with positive is negative, negative is positive. That is the dilemma of the present times. 2020 has taught us that. So what is positive? So it has a positive impact. Positive is very, very relative. Right? 2020 and 2021 has taught us that we are absolutely limited. And the positive impact, it definitely has an impact. I cannot say whether it is a positive or a negative impact, but to my mind, from what I have read and what I have seen, reconnecting with the past and reimagining a future is definitely best.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. No questions.
Thank God.
Before concluding the session, now may I request Professor A. Karnakar sir, former director OUCIP, to talk on this.
Thank you, Dr. Shruti. Nice to see you. Nice to be with us today. It's a wonderful lecture on postmodernism and metamodernism. And in a lucid way, you explained the difference between postmodernism and metamodernism. How metamodernism has become a more visible in the culture and as well as in case of academics and other areas. The way you have explained to Sunil Belladi about the metamodernism in case of media, and how the media has become more active in the 21st century. But somehow the media, today's media, when compared with the what we call a media 50 years back, the media which was there 50 years back was very truthful. Now today the media has become more commercial, and media is totally captured by the capitalists, and according to their wishes now the media is acting. Media, I don't think so media is for the people today. It's more for the profits. So therefore it can be easily visible why this media is become like that, and why it is voicing the concerns of only few sections, not the others. So that's why meta-modernism comes into fore, and we can understand it very clearly. We were very, very open in this term, and people got very good information about metamodernism, because they know what postmodernism is, not metamodernism. Metamodernism is also called postmodernism also. So therefore, thank you very much for giving the wonderful lecture on this area, and hope people will find this area suitable for their research and writing papers, or working for their PhDs or any other research work. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was very nice to see you.
Great. Nice to see you also. For a long time, pandemic has ruined the people's life all over the world. Today, what I seen in the news is that the American government has pinned down the Dr. Fauci, saying that the pandemic is a man-made pandemic. It's not a natural one. So the Fauci,
that's media again. That's media again.
Media again. The spokesperson of America today announced that Fauci has been removed from the services, and his salary is made to zero. And the American people need much more answers for all the questions, and the American people need what happened to what we call the people all over the world, to the youngsters, to the businessmen, to the small businessmen. Everybody suffered because of this. So that's again because of the media, because of the what we call scientists, that this has come into what we call to the people's knowledge.
I wrote an article for you recently, and in my research, while I was doing research for that article, I found out something very, very shocking, that critical race theory is being questioned. And there are being legislators passed in Texas, North Carolina, and other places, where they are saying that the whites should not take the blame for what happened. Slavery should be taught in schools. So this is instruction to the teachers. The legislature is instructing the teachers not to teach critical race theory, not to teach that, apartheid or whatever the white should feel responsible for history. So look at that. What is the world coming to? If America is doing all these things, well, why is America again blaming China or anyone else? So this is a big game. And people, because of the media, are being drawn into this kind of a game. Whatever the game may be, people are suffering. So nobody is concerned about the suffering people, suffering economy, but the big people, the people who want donations, or the people, I'm not naming anybody, or those people, are they suffering? They are not. They are in their ivory towers. The
Yeah,
people who are suffering are mass public.
they want the power, at the cost of the people, People, they are happy with the square meal a day, but they don't think about that. But these people, they want to rule these people. To rule them, they use all kinds of these things, the muscle power, the political power, the capital power, and all kinds of mafia into that one, like drug mafia, arms mafia, oil mafia. All this will come into that one, and they are not concerned. They want a domination. So that's where a strong animal, suppressing the weak animal. That's there. So
I saw a video. There is a forest in Chhattisgarh. Somehow, the meteorologist, the geologist have found out that there is diamond inside, under the soil. So they are simply cutting down the trees. Now you see India is shouting that we don't have oxygen. People are dying because of lack of oxygen. Protect trees, plant trees. On the one side, they tell us plant trees, protect forest. And they are celebrating Chipko movement and all that. And on the other hand, to get Hira, diamond, they are just cutting down all the trees from this forest in Chhattisgarh.
Yeah, but De Beers, is a powerful company. So it bribes the what we call people and does everything. So the common man is happy whenever the election comes in using his franchise. That's where his duty ends. But see, the one unfortunate thing is that nobody thinks that they are permanent, and they think that they are permanent. Nobody thinks that they are not permanent. That
is what Metamodernism is telling us.
Yeah.
That liberal democracy is dead, is dying out. Okay. And the middle class, who always used to protest, the intellectuals who used to protest, they are shrinking. Who is rising? The people who get 2 rupees per kilo rice or 1 rupee per kilo rice, the poor class who are fanatics, they are rising. Fanatic Hindus, fanatic Muslims, fanatic Christians, they are rising. And then the rich people are promoting this kind of fanaticism so that the middle class is silenced and they can do whatever they want.
Yes, definitely. Middle class always, in a limbo, neither he can come down nor he can go up. So, he is more concerned with his honor, he doesn't want to let down his honor. So, therefore, he's a dangling man. He's a dangling man. So, he's dangling.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, ma'am. And it's my part to propose a formal vote of thanks to this lecture. At the outset, I must be thankful to the former director, Professor A. Karnakar, the Dean, Faculty of Arts, Usman University, for negotiating with good speakers to continue these lectures without any obstruction. Thank you very much, sir, for that. And in spite of her busy schedule, being the head of the Department of English, Berhampur University, Professor Shruti Das ma'am is with us. Professor Shruti Das has published an excellent work based on a PhD thesis, From Margins to Center, on Toni Morrison, and it is an excellent work. It is useful work for many PhD and MPhil scholars. Even I have suggested to my PhD students to go through the book. Thank you very much, ma'am. You have made the topic very easy, and sometimes when we catch postmodernism or metamodernism, it's always like the term which is very difficult to understand, but through your slides, and you have made it very easy, taking number of examples and by expanding its scope, and you have tried to touch upon uncovered areas of postmodernism and metamodernism. At the beginning of the lecture, we were tensed because of the technical clinches, but thank you very much, ma'am. You have made it possible, and on behalf of the center and my wholehearted gratefulness to you, ma'am, for accepting our lecture, and we are looking forward for your cooperation. Thank you all, the registered candidates and the viewers on YouTube. And the special thanks to Professor A. Karunakar sir, and also thanks to my technical coordinator Shamil and all. Thank you very much, and we will be meeting with the next topic on next Tuesday. Thank you all.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you very much.